I am Ari Kaplan, and I am an analyst, a lawyer and an analyst that covers the legal industry here in the United States. And I thought I'd share with you, given the audience, I thought I'd share with you a very quick story that I graduated law school in 1997, and I always have to admit this when I'm talking to an academic and a law school audience, that I was a terrible law student. And during my first job interview, the partner said, "You know, Ari, you have more C's on your transcript than anyone we've have ever interviewed in the history of the law firm." And I said, "Well, sir, actually, some of those were C pluses." And that was sort of the introduction to my own legal career, which I'm proud of. I practiced for nearly 9 years and now have been covering this industry for quite some time. And so I share that because it's an incredible honor for me to be facilitating a conversation with three of the most prominent voices in legal education in the United States: Dean Danielle Conway at Dickinson Law at Penn State University, Dean Rachel Janutis, who is at the Dean at Capital University Law School, and of course, Dean Anthony Crowell at New York Law School. And I've had a connection to each of them. I was fortunate to profile Dean Conway many years ago. I spoke with Dean Janutis and, of course, conducted research with Dean Crowell. So really a privilege to be with you today and to be associated with this wonderful team. Dean Conway, I thought we'd start with just setting the framework on what it looks like here in the United States. So maybe just how would you characterize the state of legal education at the moment? You're on mute. Dean Conway, I don't think they can hear you. I think everyone was waiting to see if it was just their own phone. I don't. Yes, we're going to hear you now.
Okay, how is that?
Okay, awesome. So the question again, how would you characterize the state of American legal education? I think you can just speak. No. Okay, we're gonna.
Okay, how is that?
Okay, that's perfect.
Okay, I'll make it really quick. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. All right. So I think the legal academy in the United States, at least, has not changed until up to this moment where we've had the pandemic and racial protests. I think we had an opportunity in 2008 to actually make some significant changes, and we let that opportunity slip by. That opportunity was presented by the recession and gave us a chance to say, how do we actually make the academy in the United States more accessible, more affordable? How do we make it more relevant? And I think we let that slip by, but now I think is a real watershed moment. And I don't think we are going to make the same mistake.
Dean Crowell, how is this moment different than the sort of the crossroad in 2008, 2009?
Well, ironically, I don't think any of us are fully over. I think Danielle really teed this up very well. I don't think any law school is truly over responding to what happened starting in 2008, 2009. I know that for my own school, the full manifestation of what was going on wasn't fully realized. We didn't hit our lowest point until 2014. And so we're sort of still, I would say, in a recovering and rebuilding mode in terms of both the operation of the law school, the size of the school, as well as our approach to ensure that students have the most solid foundation to enter a legal market that has gone through a lot of changes, both in terms of what it looks like and how it does its business. And so I think that we're at ever more of an inflection point for us to take what we learned and should have accelerated in terms of reforms and improvements and thinking about how to make them work right now. I can say that when I started back in 2012, a big discussion for us was the role of technology in law schools and the role of technology in legal services. And the use and role of technology has expanded dramatically in those years. Yet I can say for my own institution, we're only starting to fully realize the potential of what we need to do and can do for our students to be prepared for this new frontier, to understand what modern practice looks like, what modern tools in practice look like, and to ensure that students not only have the substantive foundation, but those technical skills and the sophistication to deliver legal services in this new way. So I think we have a lot to do. I think there's a lot of opportunity now and quite a bit of impetus. I will further mention that what we've seen so far as a result of COVID-19, one would hope that this is temporary, and one would hope that the lessons learned more generally from those who control and regulate the impacts and effects of our economy, that the response is one that will ease the strain that we ultimately feel when the pandemic is over. But I have concerns about that. I think what law schools need to be doing and what the profession needs to be doing is preparing itself for what a response might look like longer term economically, and how lawyers have to be part of that response. So we should talk a little bit about that today, but I think that is a big issue. And I'm seeing a lot of law firms, at least in New York, sort of reposition themselves as responders to the crisis, both immediately, but also more long term.
I was going to say, I think one thing that was one thing that distinguishes this experience a little bit, and this is along the lines of what Anthony was just saying, distinguishes the experience we have now to what we had in 2010 is the universality of the experience. Obviously, law schools are experiencing the pandemic, but we all are across all sectors. And so I think it's forced law schools to do some soul searching, both in terms of functionality, right, how we function and deliver our program of legal education in this environment, but also more along the lines of Anthony's comments. It's really made us do some soul searching normatively about what is the value and role of lawyers in our society. And I think particularly the intersection of the two events that Danielle highlights, both the pandemic and the recent civil rights protests and unrest we've seen, that intersection has really made us think about what's the value that lawyers do that add, and how do we instill in our students a sense of what that value is and what their role is. And to me, that I'm very optimistic that that will remain and that we'll continue those conversations.
It's interesting that you mentioned value, because I noted from the prior speaker who said value is such an inherently subjective concept. And I love that we're having this discussion. Dean Conway, what's prevented meaningful change until now? There seems to be an appetite for it, and there are lots of catalysts, but what's preventing it? What has prevented it?
I believe what's prevented it is a hackneyed notion of what a lawyer is, who a lawyer is, and how you get there. So we have looked at the stereotypical lawyer and law practice, and we have said, if you are going to be successful, you're going to do this, you're going to look like this, and you are going to pursue these specific opportunities. We have not done the good stretching work to see who should be served by the law, how they should be served by the law, and where should the law be, a la Susskind, where should the law be, not today, but where should it be in 50 years? Who will we be serving then?
Where should it have been by now?
Oh my goodness, don't ask me that.
Well, it's just, it's interesting if we're thinking a decade, we were a decade ago kind of struggling with this, and now we are, a decade ahead.
This is why people are protesting in the streets, because we should have been paying attention to who we are serving. If we do not grasp that our obligation and role is to further a civilized humanity, we are going to fail miserably.
So, Dean Crowell, how do we capture this moment that we missed once before? What are the mechanics of not repeating the mistakes of the past?
So I think Rachel brought up that word universality, which I was sort of presenting as well. What I think is interesting about this, I think we have an opportunity to reflect on the past 12 years, but also to reflect on the past 4 months. And I think if we juxtapose the two and realize what steps might have been taken during the span between 2008, 2009, and 2020, and how we have missed, it is clear to me the opportunities we have missed, but it's also clear to me that though time and opportunity has been missed, I think everybody is much more comfortable and much more ready to engage in the kind of conversations for change that are needed. If you just look at technology alone and you take a good listen to what Danielle is saying, we have a profound opportunity to really understand the concepts of access to justice far more broadly as a result of our being forced to use technology as a medium to communicate and solve problems. All too often, I think there's been a lot of discussion about that, but not a lot of action. Just last night, I received a note from the New York State court system talking about a real, I would call it an extraordinary push to bring the technological platforms that have served the legal community for the past 4 months into the fore, and to make them a mainstay of how we provide access to justice for a very broad population. So not just technology for the most sophisticated transactions, but for very core cases in the court system for which people have had to wait months and months to seek redress, for which people have to spend a tremendous amount of money, and technology can cut away at that cost. So I think there are opportunities. We have to be willing to open our eyes and our minds to them, to seize the opportunity, and to make new students who are coming into law school, make them understand that this is part of their core toolbox, that they must understand the role of technology and its infinite roles, especially in creating access to justice and creating a more robust and sustainable economy that will serve everyone and will create that justice we seek. So I think those are the opportunities.
What's interesting is that the pandemic has in some ways presented these opportunities to the law schools just in general. So Dean Janutis, how do you see the delivery of legal services if the challenge is access to justice and identifying the core audience that we are serving? How has the pandemic and the delivery of legal services changed as a result of what everyone is addressing?
Well, obviously, the increased reliance on technology goes without saying. I think also I think really for us, I see a focus more on problem solving, communication, crisis management that I think has always been there for attorneys, but I don't think we were overt enough and transparent enough with students, the extent to which that is really the value that a lawyer brings to a situation. And it's a crisis management, problem solving tool set beyond just your knowledge of contract law or your knowledge of property law. It's a way to approach and manage problems. One of the things that's been really interesting for me to see with our students, we spend a lot of time talking to students about the need to be resilient, the need to be flexible, and as I said, the need to be really effective communicators, because so many aspects of our students' lives are being disrupted and our faculty's lives, we're really have to live those values and those attributes. And it's helping us, I think, be a little bit better in educating and preparing students to truly be crisis managers and to be resilient and flexible. I think it's also helping us instill in our students a sense of empathy for their clients and the extent to which every legal problem when a client comes to them is a problem which is disruptive and catastrophic for the particular client. So beyond teaching them the legal tech, or the tech skills they need, I feel like we're really giving them an opportunity to develop a worldview, values, and sort of a skill set that will help them be better lawyers as they move forward and better serve a broader audience.
Is there a shift in the mindset in terms of the delivery of those services? In terms of I can use AI to create a document, I can use WeChat, I can provide guidance in a whole manner of ways that didn't exist certainly when I was in law school, and now has opened up these opportunities again to serve a population that may have not have been served, or to more broadly serve a client base.
Yeah, absolutely. The other part about this, I think in 2008, 2010, maybe when I think about our faculty in the academy, our faculty largely didn't have a lot of experience with the kind of tech that we were seeing in industry and had a little bit of discomfort, I feel like, getting up to speed and learning how to share that with students. The pandemic has forced them to get comfortable with the technology and understand it. And once they became comfortable with the technology, I think they had a greater appreciation for its applications in a legal setting, and were better able to talk to students about its value, work with students, and help students develop the skills. And the same would be true of the students too. We always think of our students as digital natives and hence very comfortable with technology. That's true on one level. I mean, my students are very comfortable being on social media and on text platforms, but that doesn't mean that they have a sophistication with legal or business technology. And so now this has forced them to be comfortable with those technologies as well, which has then helped us see the broader application. The other thing for us is that the technology, and I know Ari, you're hoping to touch on this later, the technology has allowed us to broaden the scope of who we bring into the classroom to work with our students. So in the past, the faculty may have felt like they had a great responsibility to be the primary communicator of how you use various legal technologies, but now it is much easier for faculty to bring into the classroom lawyers and other AI experts, for example, and other folks who are working with the technology for limited or extended opportunities to work with students firsthand.
Dean Conway, we got a question in about how technology is impacting law school, whether it's driving just to teaching, or is it more a tool for learning? So my question about that is this now, this moment, is it actually building on what law schools have been trying to do, or have we torn down legal education and are required to now rebuild it within the context of what we're seeing in the current environment?
So there is definitely a level of unexceptionalism in what we're experiencing, but there's also a level of exceptionalism in what we're experiencing. So I think on the level of unexceptionalism, we have values. Each of our law schools has core values, a mission, and what we want to accomplish, how we want to build the lawyer. So that, I think, lands in the arena of unexceptional. But as my colleagues have mentioned, technology has to be leveraged in order to prepare that student to implement that mission in a changed and asymmetric environment. And so the way in which we tool up and staff our student has to change according to an exceptionalist view. So when my colleague Rachel Janutis talks about the utility of keeping the load of the technology simple and keeping it uniform, she is spot on, because we have all these resources. I've got the list here, things I need to learn. Nearpod, Kaltura, Canvas. I'm a Prezi user. I use Teams. But there's one of me, and I've got 25 other faculty members. And so we have to meld into our teaching and administration a more uniform way of using these tools, which means we're going to have to either survey our employers and make sure we align with what they are using, or, and this is what I have found, I have to send my tech staff and my tech savvy faculty out to employers, externship providers, and staff them up on technology so that they can actually be interoperable with our students.
Dean Crowell, both Dean Janutis and Dean Conway have mentioned this exceptional moment, this environment of remote teaching. What are the privacy issues of transforming your curriculum, on a dime and moving everything into this remote area?
So I think that there are a number of privacy issues. I think the most glaring one for us was less about content and less about individual things that are transmitted in terms of records or ideas about students that may be confidential, but more about the home environments of our students, believe it or not. That because Zoom brings you into someone's home with a backdrop, that there were issues of real equity, that some students who had, and frankly faculty members who had relative calm and quiet in their homes, were able to focus and not necessarily be distracted and not necessarily give us a glimpse into their lives in terms of the activity behind them. Now, for us, Zoom gives you the opportunity to have a virtual backdrop that can, in many ways, shield you from seeing what's going on in the background, but not in all ways. And many students were extremely vocal about the concern in being required to be visibly present in class and not just be connected through audio. So that was sort of a baseline privacy issue, and it became we found particularly problematic for students in multi-generational households where there was a lot going on all at once and they couldn't necessarily have their own space to do their work. So that was our first rung of privacy. The other thing is being able to have share communications between students in the private chat rooms. There were lots of concerns about the security of that, whether things were being made available to the whole class, what professors could communicate, how you can sort of regulate internal classroom activity without necessarily exposing what might be going on in sort of those private conversations. I think Zoom's done an adequate job of ensuring that kind of security. And I think the security of student performance and how students are individually doing on projects has been fine. We've been able to use one-on-one Zoom conversations or breakout rooms for teams of professors and students to have individualized feedback that gives the students the confidence that their records of performance are confidential and that they can make improvements accordingly without the whole class understanding how they performed.
Dean Janutis, Dean Crowell just alluded to performance, how students are doing, how they're feeling. How did students do on their final exams? What kind of performance metrics can you share?
We were really pleased with how our students performed on their exams. Actually, they've by all of our metrics, they have achieved the learning outcomes to about the same level that we had seen before, if not exceeded what we had seen before in terms of performance. So we've been really pleased with the experience thus far, and the students themselves have reported to us that they have been pleased with the experience. In terms of how they're feeling, that's probably a different answer, Ari. I mean, I think they feel pleased with their academic performance. I think we're still struggling in our community with a sense of dislocation and disconnectedness. And so we're still working on how to better create and maintain connections among our students and between the students and the faculty in a remote environment. And then I think the other aspect of that is I think they still feel a level of uncertainty and discomfort with the technology, that the actual platforms and the technology, as Danielle alluded to. I'm a big proponent of trying to minimize the load on students, because I appreciate that the just managing the technology becomes distracting from the rest of their academic functions. So, you know, their feedback was their performance on the actual legal part was strong, but they still feel like they are struggling to figure out how to use the tools that we're asking them to use to perform in the classroom. And so a lot of our planning for fall has focused on those aspects. How can we, number one, better help the students understand how to create a sense of community? You know, to Anthony's point about privacy, it wasn't just about maintaining the privacy of their student-to-student communications in the classroom. It was now so much of their interaction that normally would have been very informal and just taking place sort of organically in remote parts of the building. Now the only vehicle they have to communicate are these institutionally provided platforms. And so how do we ensure a sense of privacy, but also a sense of informality that allows those relationships to continue the way they would have in the building? Thinking about that, and thinking about how we do a better job in terms of setting expectations about professional behavior in a remote environment and helping them manage that. So, you know, Anthony makes a great point about the cameras forward facing and the fact that that had an invasive effect for many students and faculty, because it brought people into their home life. Trying to communicate better expectations about why that's important as a professional and why it is that we would ask you to do that, as opposed to just sort of really wanting to be invasive about your home life. We're not trusting that you're there and participating, is, you know, along the lines of what we're trying to do to help address what we saw as some of the student feedback.
Yeah, I'll just add
comments. Yes, please, Dean Crowell.
Oh no, I just want to add one thing to Rachel. I appreciate what she said. One of the things we did for our summer program, so we put together a summer associate simulation program in which there are 3 different practice group tracks, but of the 200 students participating, we asked them all to be forward-facing and visible, but we gave them a backdrop explicitly designed with the logo of the summer program. And it's worked by and large, but there are still students who keep the cameras off. We said that was fine if there were true problems in their background, but that has worked well. And as Rachel said, to set that baseline of expectations early on, and explain why there are some professional considerations they need to take into account, because they will be using these tools professionally and can't sort of opt out when dealing with client counseling and things like that.
I have a 14-year-old, I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. My 14-year-old, I asked her what's the experience like with Zoom and how you have to stare into this green light all the time. And she said, Dad, nobody puts the camera on. Nobody's staring at the screen. You're very weird. So I think that generationally there's a distinction. Dean Conway, I just wanted to close this point and ask you about feedback. What kind of feedback did you receive, and how are you going to use that moving forward into the next academic year?
Our students have been very engaged with us. We fortunately have a law school environment where we are in a hamlet, we're in a village. And so the students live around this campus. Everything is walkable. And so the feedback we've been getting is, number one, we want back into the building. So, you know, architecture is amazing because they in some sense are connected with it. The proximity has really burdened the students. They see the building and that's why they want to be in it. But that begs the question, because they want to be in it because the way the building is constructed is very open plan. It is very engaging. It has a atrium and everyone sits there and eats. And so you really see the humanity coming out of the students, and they really want that connection back. And then the third thing I'll say, which leads to the intimacy. Many of us on this call can appreciate this comment that I'm about to make. You know, no matter where we come from, we really romanticize this profession, whether good or bad. I'm not at all embarrassed to say I love the law. And I think because of this romantic notion about the law, there is this intimacy that our students really want to tap into. So the feedback that I've been getting is thank you for the virtual engagement. This has been absolutely fabulous. You have gone to the mat, but we want the proximity and we want the intimacy back.
So Dean Crowell, let's shift for a second because Dean Janutis mentioned this and the prior speaker mentioned this about the value of a law degree. How has the value of a law degree remained constant over, let's say, the past decade of change?
I think it's grown in value. Can you all hear me? Because on my end, I'm having some tech problems.
We hear you. It might be a little shaky, but we hear you.
Okay, great. So I think the value of a law degree has grown more. I can say that I think that the importance of what lawyers do and the breadth of what lawyers do has never been more fully understood or realized than in very recent years. I think that if you just look at how the economy was transformed, how regulation has the breadth of regulation is immense, but the roles that lawyers play in the economy and in delivering justice is more pronounced than ever. And I will say that we have seen so many more students since the economic recovery really have not just sort of a renewed spirit, but a fierce and passionate desire to want to be leaders. I think leadership, management, and advocacy are what is emerging to me as the dynamic for those who want to be lawyers today. And it takes shape in all different ways. I think there was once a time in the very recent past where there was a very clear stratification of what lawyers did and whether it was accepted for those with JDs to perform certain work and call themselves lawyers. I think that is the case to a much lesser extent these days. And I think the validity and importance of lawyers holding a number of different roles because of the framework of their thinking, their problem-solving skills, they're being the adult in the room, and they're having a ready-made set of tools that can connect different parts of society all at once is incredibly valuable. So we see lawyers occupying very, very dynamic roles in ways that they never have prior to the past, say, 10 years. So I think the value is much greater. And I also think there's good value in law school right now. Many law students can find extraordinary opportunities to attend school with generous merit scholarships and a real sensitivity to provide access to legal education through better financial aid. So there's a lot of pluses to that as well.
Dean Crowell, we just received a question that dovetails onto your point exactly. So the question is, in general, what's the future of legal education in the United States for international students, particularly those from Asia?
So I think that we would all agree that we live in a global economy and that the need to have lawyers who understand how the world is connected is important. So for lawyers from Asia to come to the United States to study is an important thing. I would say that in the short term, obviously we all have concerns about the ability for those to be able to travel and attend school in the United States. But I think the longer term prospect is extremely important. I do think that the value of technology and the ability for us to use remote and distance learning techniques to engage lawyers and law students from an international environment will be critically important, not only for us to have a ready-made set of partners in different places that understand the role and value of American law globally, but also because we will learn from others about how the legal systems in other nations work, as well as how we can develop better cross-border partnerships. So I think there's real values, and I think Asia is certainly a frontier that will only grow stronger in the years to come.
Dean Janutis, this idea of value continues to come up, and now we've layered on this idea of delivering a legal education differently, less than in person. Is the value of a remote legal education different or somehow less impactful than one that's right on campus in these beautiful buildings in this very intimate environment?
Well, the answer has to be that it can't be less impactful. I mean, we can't do that, right? We have to figure out how we continue to have the kind of impactful education that we believed we were having pre-pandemic. And so, for us, it's thinking about what truly was inherently impactful about residential education. And how do we then replicate that in a remote environment? And quite frankly, moving forward, when we get to a place where we're providing something that looks like a hybrid or a blended education, which is really where we see ourselves going long term, how do we pick and choose the experiences that are the most impactful when delivered residentially, and what are the experiences that we can deliver impactfully in a remote environment, and think about, what's the sweet spot of using both platforms, both residential education and remote education, to really, I think, deliver an even more impactful education, right? We know we can use, Anthony just touched on the fact that we can use remote education to create a more globally inclusive classroom. With respect to just the idea of international students, it's a way that we could broaden the international audience for legal education by reducing the costs, both financial and non-financial costs of accessing education in the US, which in turn inures to the benefit of our students here in the US to have that international classroom. So how do we do that? And on the other hand, identify those opportunities within the curriculum to provide residential education for the highest level of impact. And I don't purport to have the answers to that today, but that's our project looking forward, is how we think about that balance and actually create a more impactful education.
And I want to acknowledge that CUHK law is a leader in this area and has really been, working toward this goal. So it's, again, a privilege for me to be associated with this conference. And so, Dean Conway, I'm curious about you've mentioned the meaning and the need for this connection inside the classroom. I was a law student many years ago and did not enjoy learning in the Socratic method. It was very scary to me. I was very worried about getting called on. How has your faculty adapted its approach to, appropriately scare students to study? No, I'm kidding. How have they adapted to appropriately educate, even in an environment where we're just having this back and forth on a screen?
I think I'll draw inspiration from your joke. I think it's to not scare the students. In fact, it's to say, okay, let's now figure out what the best practices are to create an impactful education using these tools that we have available to us. And so I'm going to tie another concept in, and that is the racial protests and the unrest that we are thankfully experiencing in the United States while we are addressing these issues of police impunity and their attack, frankly, on Black and brown people in America. I think what our faculty has realized is we as lawyers and law faculty have to be on the front lines of addressing these inequities. And how do we do that? By embedding important principles into the education model that we are teaching. And so we want to flip all of it on its head. So our faculty here's another wonderful thing. Our faculty in doing this important work has said, we are here for the year, meaning the summer. So we are going through summer workshops, educational workshops, to begin embedding this important content, social, civil rights content, into our syllabi, into our instruction, and also on this platform, on this hybrid remote platform. We are also seeing our faculty step up in the summer virtual engagement, and they are doing contextualized book club meetings with prospective students and current students. We have more doctrinal faculty now integrating with clinical faculty to provide internship, externship experiences and supports for students now who are working from home. So we are looking at moving away from the Socratic method, embracing the individual student, but layering context, substantive historical context, into why we are here at this moment at the intersection of a pandemic that's having a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown people around the world, not just in America.
Substantive historical context. What a great way to characterize it. Dean Crowell, has this experience been different for your day students versus your night students who may have been more adept at kind of this, remarkable balancing act of law school and career?
And definitely, I will say that one of the things that came up a little bit early in our conversation was that longing for community and for wanting to be together. And we see that in tremendous, tremendous ways from the students who are part of our full-time program. They really miss that collegiality, that having a place to go every day and a place to work with their classmates. On the other hand, our evening students who are all full-time professionals going to school part-time, and many of them are in banking, many of them may work at law firms and other than lawyer roles, and a number of them are in the medical professions. I will say that they find this new approach to be refreshing and one that saves them a lot of time and allows them to have better engagement with their classmates, believe it or not, because they can cut out some of the commuting time. It allows them to go into class. They are studying online together, and they're creating online communities that are, in some ways, saving them more time and making the quality of their learning and their preparation better as a result of them not having to be so taxed with a very difficult New York City commute, as you can imagine. So we think that the value of the online experience is important for both our full-time and part-time students, but we see the role of the online technology probably being more pronounced in the future for the evening program. And we were in the process of evolving our evening program to make it more of a 21st century program where there were online components. So definitely differences between those with more professional experience and who can understand the value a little more based on the time proposition.
I love this discussion about the connecting with people and trying to figure out communities. I remember maybe a couple of months into this, someone said to me, "What's the first thing you're going to do when people can kind of gather again?" And instinctively, without even thinking, I said, "I don't know, hug my mom." There was this moment where I thought, yeah, that connection is so powerful. Did you notice Dean Conway, Dean Crowell have both mentioned kind of the structural nature of legal education now and law school. Dean Conway also mentioned that her faculty has committed to being kind of year-round attendees on campus. Are we now seeing a change in terms of law school being a 12-month, a kind of a year-round endeavor rather than just August to May?
Well, actually, that's not new for us. Our program really was pretty much a 12-month the year program going into this, and it remains. But we have definitely heightened our efforts to engage with our students, and a larger percentage of our students are engaging with us across the summer months. So it's really continuing something that we started. I think where the engagement has changed, and I think this touches on some things that Danielle and Anthony have already said, for us is the level at which we need to engage in the nature of the engagement. So I think back at the beginning of this conversation, Danielle talked about really the need to diversify the profession and diversify who the profession serves. And we've always had that as a hallmark mission of our institution. One of the things that we learned in this situation is we saw the extent to which the disruptions disproportionately affected various aspects of our student body, and the extent to which the difference in and the disproportional impact impacted students' ability to be successful in the classroom in their legal education. I think those barriers and disruptions were always there. This pandemic really brought them to the forefront and made us confront and realize that they're there, and that if we want to achieve our mission of diversifying the profession, providing access to the profession, we want our students to be successful, that we really need to do all that we can to address all the barriers that they face in terms of success. So Anthony alluded to the privacy issues with having Zoom come into students' homes. Our students were concerned about the privacy impact of that, but what it highlighted for us even more was the extent to which our students were disproportionately able or unable to carve out space from their personal and professional responsibilities in a pandemic to address their schoolwork. And that inability to do that was disproportionately felt by some of the marginalized communities that we were most trying to serve in our law school. So when we talk about engagement now, we're thinking about it in the summer and really all year round in broader terms about how we can engage the students on all levels, not just growing their intellectual and providing intellectually enrichment activities, not just growing their sense of community with each other and with the Columbus community, but what we can do really to help address some of the other barriers and challenges they're facing and help them provide resources and develop skills to carve out space that they need to achieve their academic goals.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. I just want to add what Rich said. I really appreciate that, Rich. I think, I'll add, our environments are very different. Danielle is in a more rural area. Rachel's in more of in a metropolitan area, but a smaller scale. New York City is this immense metropolis. Our students come from New York and New Jersey. New York itself is five counties in one city, frankly, 5 boroughs in one city. And it is an incredible challenge. Some of our students have 2-hour public transportation commutes each way to school. And I really think that has taxed them and disadvantaged them in many ways. And it has for years at New York Law School and many other law schools in New York City, especially law schools who are deeply dedicated to providing access to historically underserved communities and underrepresented communities in law schools. So I think we're at a moment where we can really make much better use and make legal education more accessible in the most basic ways, and really cut through some of the expense and the time and the difficulty for students to really perform well and to achieve the excellence we want them to achieve. We've got to work really hard at creating the right mechanisms and the right formats to do that. But it's really underscored for me the real value of sending a Zoom link to somebody rather than asking them to get on the express bus from Staten Island for an hour and 45 minutes for a single class one day.
And I would just take that one step further. It's not just made me and made the faculty really think very seriously about what's the value of a Zoom link so that they cut out their commuting time. What is it that I need to actually compel them to be on Zoom at a set time when we're all going to be together, even though that may mean a difficult juggle with their family responsibilities? What is it that I can send to them and allow them to engage with on their own schedule in a way that they can carve out the time that makes sense for them. And again, it's finding that sweet spot. I mean, there is definitely a value and a need for those times of synchronous, contemporaneous engagement. But what we have learned is maybe it's not as much as we thought, right? It doesn't need to be 100% of the time.
Totally agree.
And that once we open up ourselves to the possibilities of these other forms of delivery, we actually make things more accessible. I mean, to your question about Socratic method, I think a great example, the use of asynchronous platforms like discussion boards to allow students who maybe historically did not feel that they could, didn't feel comfortable voicing their opinions in the class, to give them that platform to be able to see that as a faculty member and then go into class and really validate and draw out that person's voice into the classroom. To me, that's a way where we can use technology to make things like the Socratic method actually more effective in achieving our goals.
So let's turn to the forward vision. Where are we headed? What can we look forward to? Dean Conway, I wanted to pivot for a second because you've passionately talked about the protests and what kinds of change and embracing understanding and equality and empathy in this environment. How are you and how can we all kind of empower students to act on that and to build a kind of a better environment?
I'm putting something in the chat, if that's okay. And what I'm putting in the chat is take care of your backyard first before you start talking to other people about how they should tend to their backyards. Mm-hmm. And so this really was a project born out of that recognition that we at law schools and in the legal academy, we have a special duty. I love that from the torts perspective. We have a special duty toward modeling what just behavior looks like, modeling professionalism, and modeling inclusion. And so when our police have taken advantage with impunity their positions and authority, who is there to put a check on that behavior? It should be, yes, legislators, but at the base of it, it's what we are teaching and modeling at law schools. So I was fortunate to be a co-creator on the ALS Law Dean's Anti-Racist Clearinghouse project. And this has been a great way to model, not just platitudes or statements about how we abhor injustice. It is an approach to how we intend to lead for justice. Anthony mentioned that when he was talking about what is the new role for lawyers. And he said leadership and management and advocacy. And Rachel talked about crisis management. Well, here we are, and this is the ultimate live clinic. And so this project is meant to propel that leadership forward. And so I commend it to all of you. Please look at it. Please read it. Please think about it. And it is meant to be a leadership iterative process.
All right, let me just mention, Danielle, I've said this to you before. Thank you for doing this for American legal education and for Juneteenth, which for those on the call who don't know, that is the day in which we commemorate emancipation in the United States. I will say that I asked my entire senior staff and faculty to spend part of yesterday reviewing the Anti-Racist Clearinghouse. It's extraordinary and is a real framework for what every law school in the United States needs to be thinking about and taking action on in terms of our next steps and our responses to what's going on.
Thank you, Anthony.
I want to ask each of you about preparing students. It seems to me that we are in a period of tremendous uncertainty and tremendous change in a way that I guess generationally we've said this to one another over decades. Oh, my generation is different. But this one seems particularly uncertain and confusing. How are you preparing students to thrive in this environment? There are so many more considerations. There are so many things that seem to be coming out of left field, or things that have been there all the time that they are now seeing come to the fore. Dean Crowell, I'd love to start with you, but I'd love to hear from each of you on that point.
So your question is
how are you preparing students to thrive in a more uncertain legal environment?
I think that what we've done is, and I'll revert back to what I said. I started at the law school 8 years ago in 2012, before American legal education really hit its lowest point in terms of the full effects of the downturn from 08 and 09. And I will say that we put a lot of new foundations in place. And I think that those have served us well. For example, I think we really help to shape the professional destinies of our students from even before the time they show up for the first week of orientation. I think the minute one is admitted to our school, we really start to set a set of expectations for professionalism, for academic success. We give them the supports they need, and we give them the kinds of advice and counseling that they need to navigate the legal market in a way that will best suit them and best make opportunities available to them in light of whatever circumstances are on the ground. So for us, we have unified our academic and career advising units. I think that has been among the most important innovations. Every student, from the day they start, they get a single advisor who both helps them navigate the curriculum, makes the right choices, and also helps them in terms of their career tracks. Our curriculum is one that offers and requires students to get deep insights into what we view as the three dominant areas of the economy: business and financial services, intellectual property, media and technology, and government and public interest. So students come out understanding the interrelated and interdependent natures of those three areas of the law and practice. And I think that has served them well in terms of being able and fluent in understanding opportunity, having a level of professionalism and understanding the expectations, and also taking responsibility for their place in the profession, the responsibilities as a lawyer to serve and to lead, but also to understand what in the market is available to them and how they can best serve in the profession as a result. And it's worked. It's been a lot of difficult, challenging effort for us, but it has worked, and our students have seen great success as a result.
Dean Janutis, I would love to hear from you and try to understand, how does the fall, the 2020-2021 academic year look as a reflection of this idea of preparing students to be in a more uncertain environment?
So I think, first of all, I think that's what we've always said is the value of a law degree, is the ability to, and the role that lawyers play, which is the ability to navigate change and manage change and help others manage change. For us, it means really living that, walking that, and doing that for real, helping students figure out how they can exercise some level of control and experience comfort in an area where there's discomfort. So it's giving the students greater autonomy in the classroom, given the lack of autonomy and control that they feel in the larger environment. So it's maybe putting curricular measures in place that literally allow students to make choices among different teaching devices and learning opportunities within a particular class that will give them what they feel like is the best opportunity to achieve the learning objectives of the course in a managed and structured way, so that the menu of alternatives, all of them, will lead to whatever outcome it is you're trying to achieve, but will allow them to have a little bit of autonomy in doing that. It is trying to, as I said, meet their need for connection and community in a way that will help them feel like they have a little bit more control and are better able to manage the situation. And then it is ultimately, I think, just doing a better job educating students on different technological platforms so that they can be comfortable operating in those environments, and really framing our efforts to educate them on technological platforms in terms of helping them understand how those platforms are used, not just in the law school, but in the legal community writ large. So I think I talked a little bit about talking to the students, setting expectations for what we think the behavior should be in a remote learning environment, but framing those expectations in terms of here's what it means to be a professional in the age of remote lawyering. And what we're doing here and asking of you here is what was going to be asked of you when you leave here and you're working in the profession. So here's an opportunity to begin developing those skill sets and getting comfort with them.
I'm honored to be doing this. I thought the audience, I'm sure the audience has noticed this, but while the deans have called each other Anthony and Danielle and Rachel, I can't help but call them Dean Conway, Dean Janutis, Dean Crowell. That's the level of respect. And I also feel the same way about Professor Gallagher and Dean Wolf for giving us this privilege. It's really been an honor to join you. And I want to thank the deans who participated with me and the law school, and just to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.